right. I can see some people coming in, so that's very good. And I think we can start. I do expect more people will keep coming in. So welcome to the Mirror Hall. I know there's been a little mix-up about which chat is going to be hosted at which hall, but good to see some faces here. Probably the die-hard believers in the transatlantic relationship being in this room. Many thanks. My name is Vasilis Dousas. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor on International Relations at the only progressive European political foundation, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, and we're based in Brussels. The chat, the panel title is a question, and I think we've been graced by the organizers with perhaps the most existential question of all panel titles throughout the 3 days of the summit. The question is pretty direct, pretty straightforward. It's whether we are nearing a point where we can see an end to global agreements on common challenges. And if you break down that title, you see that there is the second part, the common challenges. It's, again, pretty straightforward. We're talking about problems, the problems of today, problems of tomorrow, that are so transversal, that are so cross-cutting, that it is very difficult to imagine that an efficient solution to them by the global community, by the world, can be done in a piecemeal fashion, in a fragmented way. Because if you try to tackle these questions like climate change in a fragmented way, not only such a piecemeal reaction will not suffice to solve them, but it will actually fail miserably to do so. And then you have the first part, and I think that's also quite commonsensical, pretty straightforward, the loaded part of the question that is implying that we are nearing a situation where there is an end to global agreements. This presupposes, or rather implies, that up to this point, over the past few decades, we have had global agreements. We've had a level of global agreement on how these common challenges are to be tackled. This might not be entirely true because the agreements that we've had have not been truly global, and perhaps some might say, some critics or skeptics would say that they haven't been true agreements. But what we had in the past few decades has been a system, a multilateral rules-based system of governance that has been created, that has been designed, and to an extent has been implemented with the aim of coming up with global agreements. From trade to nuclear disarmament, from the UN system to the economic sphere, we have had this rules-based governance system that has been put in place. Now, what we've been experiencing, especially in the last 2.5 years, has been, in a nutshell, the fact that this system, this multilateral system, multilateralism at large, has been under increasing strain, perhaps unprecedented strain. And qualitatively, where the crucial differentiating factor to the past might be, is the fact that these challenges to the multilateral system, they're not only coming from known opponents to the system, but they're coming also from hitherto champions of the system, protagonists of the system. And I think the case of the US under the leadership of President Trump and his administration is the prime example of that. How is Europe reacting to this emerging landscape? Well, first of all, vis-a-vis the US, we had gone through different phases, starting from anxiety to denial to compartmentalization, trying to see what we can do jointly, and now to a phase where it's quite difficult to find issues of alignment in order to resuscitate or reinvigorate the transatlantic relationship. This withdrawal, this penchant of the Trump administration towards being a little bit more disdainful towards multilateralism, this preference for bilateralism, for quid pro quo arrangements, this has meant that we've had a withdrawal of the US a little bit from leadership, and this vacuum has been filled in, or there has been an attempt to be filled in by other players, great powers, like China, who've engaged in some parallel order shaping, but at the same time, they've tried to come up with their own ideas of what this multilateral, this global agreement system is to look like in the future. Of course, Europe has failed in many aspects in its practical defense of multilateralism over the past few years. A little bit awkward in terms of how it is to engage, not to be squeezed between these two great powers, China and the US. But defending multilateralism and transforming multilateralism is a strategic prerogative for Europe, perhaps the most radical form of multilateral agreement ever conceived. As a good friend wrote a few months ago, multilateralism is to Europe what air is to humankind. We take it for granted when it is there, but we gasp for survival when the air starts thinning. So how is Europe to respond to these challenges if we are indeed nearing an end of global agreements on common challenges? This is a pretty simple, straightforward question that we have about half an hour to respond to authoritatively, easy peasy. So I expect our excellent panel to do that. And we are indeed very grateful that we have two distinguished speakers here to help us navigate through the murky waters of this question. On my left, immediate left, I have Ms. Marika Lintam, who is the Director General of the Department of Foreign Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. So welcome and many thanks. And further to my left, I have Mr. Vladimir Betel, who is the Deputy Minister in the section of European Union Foreign Trade at the Ministry of Industry and Trade here in the Czech Republic.
Hello.
Hello and welcome. So I'm going to start with Ms. Lintam. Before that, as always in the Prague European Summit, please do go on Slido, submit your questions there. We'll have some time in the end to engage in a discussion. So Ms. Lintam, what's your take on this very loaded question?
Thank you very much, Vasilis. And well, half an hour might be a little short to answer this really a huge question. But as you started, I would also like to first underline that indeed we are facing in a way a paradox because we have a world that is more globalized than ever, more connected, more complex than ever, and in addition to the topics where global agreements were, at least to a large part, multilateral and englobing a lot of the world, agreements have been there for trade, for security. Now we have new challenges like climate, as you alluded, and also there are the questions posed by the digital age, how to manage. With the new technological advances. And thus the need for commonly agreed rules is greater than ever. And I would say that we still perhaps do have more rules applicable to a large number of countries than we have had ever before. It's true that with regard to some agreements there have been slide backs, but still I think the order is quite a strong one that has been built over the past decades mostly. And at the same time, coming to the paradox, we are indeed seeing that there is increasing pressure on this multilateral order and rules-based system because of the unilateralist acts of several countries, and whether these are just temporary tendencies or something for long term, whether these are signs of bigger tectonic changes, as some allude, or transition to a different kind of situation on the global scene, or something indeed that that Europe could just wait out, as has been one of the questions posed for the panel. Well, it's definitely not something that has a very straightforward answer, I think, but I don't think that Europe can afford waiting it out just like that. It has taken, well, having multilateralism in its something inherent in its system. Somebody has said in its DNA is, I think, in a way predestining Europe to be one of the front runners and leading forces for multilateralism on global stage. And maybe the question is whether it really has all the tools for that, whether it is really fully using its potential. There are, of course, some limits that come from the competencies of the European Union. In CFSP, it's clearly shared with member states, and you need a lot of political will already to advance. And the efforts that the European Union has done so far in, for example, what I think has been one of the important aspects of its role has been mediation and bringing different actors, different countries to the table, either on the Iran deal or other other difficult issues. It has managed to forge some compromises and use its kind of soft power in a way. Whether it could have a more strategic outlook on how to really advance these global agreements. That is, I think, something quite important for also the next Commission and the High Rep to look at. So far, there have been, I think, many efforts that are very important and commendable, but there's always the question whether there's more that can be done.
Right. And do you think there is more to be done?
I think already having a kind of a more strategic look at what the possibilities are, what the
so you would
roles
set
can
the
be.
agenda higher, more ambitious.
I think Europe definitely has a role,
okay.
yes, in keeping the multilateralism well and in good shape. Good shape, yeah. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Bertel. Your take, perhaps, since you have that trade expertise, perhaps you can refer to that as well.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and organizing that. I guess that I do agree what you said at the beginning, is that we took the multilateralism as for granted, and now we are sometimes being, surprised that it's not that obvious. And of course, the WTO and EU are organizations made by people, so it's imperfect. It's necessary the discussions about modernization of WTO, and this is legal discussions, and I believe you cannot hear me. And
well, the room is small enough, so even in the absence of a microphone.
One, two. Okay. I don't know if the philosophical thoughts are deep enough to change the microphones, but anyway. I believe that if you look at for what means, for example, for Czech Republic, and as we joined the European Union 15 years ago, and with the European Union we joined also, as well the single market with 500 million people and 20 million companies, and of course, the type of the Czech Republic, the economy of the Czech Republic is export-oriented, and it's extremely important for us that we are part of multilateral organizations which has such a tool as a single market. And if you look at the crisis of multilateralism, if you can call it this way, I'm coming to Brussels now, 6th year on a trade policy committee, representative for Czech Republic, and I can see I can feel the shift on how we looked at FTAs, of free trade agreements 5 years ago, and what is in stake now. It's, if you look at TTIP, how imperfect it was, still it was possibility that two economic blocs as the European Union and United States and the negotiators and experts for regulatory chapters, etc., they were naturally meeting each other, they were discussing, and that was necessary for the business and for consumers on both sides. Now we are coming back on track, having 1 month ago agreed the mandate for European Commissions to negotiate with the United States the tariffs and decreasing tariffs, and also the conformity assessment. But we are seeing quite a lot of unpredictability on one hand. We can see that what was as a natural and, as you said, granted in multilateralism, we were always trying to find a win-win situation. And if you look at what is now the regular response, for example, from our strategic ally as the United States, it's kind of high threshold of unpredictability. On the other hand, if we look at some regularities, there is a very interesting book written by Charles Lederman and Brendan Sims, Donald Trump, The Making of World's View, and it's very important to see, as those two British scientists, they studied thousands of interviews with Donald Trump. Not the books, as you not always can, get the authenticity on the books, but the interviews, and they were trying to find some lines which are consistent, which are there all the time in 20 years, let's say, starting in the 80s, when they identified that Donald Trump started to be interested in politics, and they found actually 3 of them, consistent lines, and one of them is directly related to trade policy, and it's the conviction that win-win concept doesn't exist. It's always win or lose. That the trade is zero-sum game, and we know from the practical life it's not true. It's probably based, as they analyzed, it's probably based on his experience, professional experience in real estate, that you don't make a lies, you make a business, but you have to make the business again, next time, and you don't have friends and there are no small fights, or just fights, so you have to win all the time. So if you look at that as a premises, then we can understand more what we can expect, and now when we come back to the former USTR, Michael Froman, who was the main negotiator for TTIP, we are coming with, remember him with some nostalgic, because it was during the Obama administrations, it was quite predictable. It was tough, the negotiations were really tough, but it was predictable. Now we can just keep the track until the next tweet. And as the negotiations with China show that for a long time it looked that the negotiations are running rather well until the 1 or 2 tweets which shattered the situations, and now we are on the verge of a trade war in between those two. So back to WTO, I think that a very important thing is that the modernization is being focused. I'm really glad that European Union is one of the leaders trying to find how to modernize, also to focus on things which should be in 21st century, like e-commerce, and I believe that these what are the negotiations about the coming in Geneva these days are extremely important, because the e-commerce can really be beneficial for all members.
Right. Thank you, Minister. Perhaps as a quick follow-up, though, because you certainly touched upon, for a second, by the way, when you were referring to Trump lines, I missed that N in the word, so I was thinking that you were referring to something else that the research you referred to was referring to. But especially when it comes to the WTO, do you have the feeling that we are approaching a breaking point? I know, for example, there is the failure of the Trump administration to nominate judges for the appellate court body. Is that something that worries you? Is that something that, as Ms. Lintham said, can we afford to wait it out?
Well, the dispute settlement mechanism crisis, and especially the appellate body, is now being starving to death almost. This is the most serious threat of the WTO, of course, as the dispute settlement mechanism was one of the pillars of this multilateral-based, rules-based trade system. So obviously, we are looking on some interim solutions, like Plan B, but of course, if you look at what's in core, there is no really ideal alternative to what was before. And if you look at statistics, what appellate body and dispute settlement mechanism up to now was dealing with, United States was not in short in more than half of the cases, the appellate body was in favor of United States in cases. So it's not like it was completely wrong. I believe it's possible definitely to improve it, but it's necessary also to get some concrete suggestions. And we are facing for some times that our US partners are rather negative in reactions, but not coming with constructive contra proposals how the dispute settlement mechanism should be, let's say, fixed.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, we heard about the paradox, more interconnected world, more transversal problems, and yet a lower degree of appetite, perhaps, in many powers, not in Europe, but beyond European borders, to find that kind of common agreements on common challenges. On that basis, I'm going to turn to Slido. I see we have some questions here, and I think, yeah, we have to touch upon the result of the European elections. I think it's unavoidable, since the Prague European Summit has been timed to coincide with the immediate aftermath of the elections. So I'm going to start with that question. Very briefly, how will the recent European elections alter the future of transatlantic relationship? Ms. Lintham, do you want to go first?
Well, that's quite a hard question. So shortly after the European Parliament elections, and since the new Parliament composition is only forming, I'm not sure that we are looking at any direct consequences really for this relationship. But of course, it remains to be seen.
But this is a year of institutional reconfiguration. That
is true, and of course, what will be the priorities for the next 5 years of the next Commission? That will be very important, and building a good transatlantic relationship, I think, should be one of those.
But from a Baltic perspective, do you see? Of course, we only got glimmers because now the real game begins after the results are out. But do you see the preconditions on the ground for a sufficient level of unity within Europe in order to have a concerted action plan and a unified voice when dealing with the US?
Well, I think the need is there, but well, how to exactly define the strategy, that will of course be for the next leadership.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bertel.
Well, I do agree with Marika that it's really important who will be dealing in the European Commission, next commissions with portfolio, and hopefully the next commissioner who will be responsible for trade will be pro-trade. That would help.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully. Regarding the European Parliament, I'm afraid that the results are more being fragmented, and they are not looking at the moment, and looking that will help trade that much. I believe that it will take more effort to fight the coalitions and help to explain what's the benefits in free trade generally, because it's not just free trade now; it has in many other aspects.
I'm just going to touch upon another question which asks what future relationships should the EU seek to cultivate globally, and I think that touches upon trade very much. Do you see China as a potential partner through which we can, promote a more multilateral trade agenda?
Well, when we touched the United States, and we actually didn't really talk about kind of some protectionist measures, like being on security explanations, because this was surprising and still is for us as a European allies, that like the steel and aluminium was the tariffs was decided upon the Section 232, the national security. There is still threat for the tariffs on car and car parts, which is even hard to imagine how European, the imports of European cars to the United States can mean a national threat. But on the other hand, there are many moments when we can prove that the protectionism is not everywhere. European Union succeed to finalize the free trade agreement with Canada, the CETA, or with Japan. They open discussions with Australia, New Zealand. There's Singapore, there's Vietnam. So we see that all those are proofs that they are partners for to show the portfolio and that we are sharing the values that free trade is helping the companies, consumers, etc. If you are touching China, it's obviously a big player with also even bigger ambitions, and it's necessary to distinguish between opportunities and threats, and also sometimes about what is being said and subsequent actions. We are hearing from our Chinese partners quite a lot of discussions and affinities towards multilateralism, but the actions are sometimes lagging behind, and so obviously this is a partner to be discussed with. On the WTO is also one of the partners with whom we can build on the new dispute settlement mechanism, and but on the other hand, and this is touching back to United States, with them and with Japan, they are really important to have the trilateral discussions about, what's happening sometimes in some countries, and China is among them. There's the state aid, also the market distortions, which are in domino effects affecting negatively the trade all around the globe.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the audience to see if there's any questions that have not been submitted via Slido. I know there's a mic around. Yes, the gentleman in the front.
Yes, thank you very much, Ivan Hodac. I don't have any comments to what you have said. I agree on the WTO. I think we have to do something about it. The multilateralism is going to be there, has to stay. We need the WTO. I have two very simple questions. One is Brexit. After this disappearance of the eventual disappearance of the UK from the European Union, is it going to diminish the negotiating power of the EU in the future? Free trade agreements, for instance, with India, with the United States. India is still open. We have never finished the negotiations. So what is not the European Parliament, but what is going to happen with the disappearance of the UK? And second, you have not mentioned the word India, and you know, there are 1.5 billion people, and the Indian economy is growing. And if China is player today, India will be player tomorrow, an important player. How do you see this? You know, the role of India in the future, or today, what we have, the triangular relation between China, United States, and Europe. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. The scope of benign neglect when it comes to EU-Indian relations has come to the Prague European Summit. Ms. Lintham, do you want to take it first?
Yes, well, on Brexit, the EU will be a global economic player, and with a good clout for trade deals, I would think also after Brexit. But well, clearly, there's the power will be somewhat diminished because UK is a strong economy, strong. And big country, and when it leaves, then of course that will leave a certain mark. But I think that my take is that the European Union's negotiating power will still remain considerable enough.
All right, Mr. Bertel.
Well, I do understand why Mr. Hodac posed those two questions, because they're really interlinked together, and it's true that the Brexit is changing the voting mathematics within the EU. We are losing a really powerful ally, the same as Estonia. Czech Republic is member of a like-minded group for the free trade, but also for single market. For those, also for nuclear energy, for us, we are really losing a powerful ally, and now once the United Kingdom would be gone, then the Germany and France together is already having 33% of populations. If they add two smaller countries with 2% of populations, this will be blocking minority already. So from the perspective of trade, this is some things we have to look at, and we have to be ready to make new coalitions and look at each case, you know, separately, and trying to be immunized from that. The Brexit is also some things which maybe should be, you know, put in bracket before, that this could be the result of some things which we see in many countries as a kind of attack to traditional democratic procedures. Once the new technologies are influencing the democratic elections, etc. And when I talked to a British colleague in Brussels yesterday, and I asked him how he sees the Brexit next steps, he said, I'm done with predicting. All my predictions were wrong. I cannot say anything more. And this is also based, and he admitted it's based on that the public is being subjected by, you know, by false informations, with kind of conspiracy theories, etc. And the decisions, the democratic decisions were influenced by that. So coming to trade, losing United Kingdom is a really valuable loss for European Union and for multilateralism.
Very briefly on India.
India has a big future. When we talked about China and ambitious, we are not doubting about ambitious in India. We are still a little bit behind when we discuss the investment agreement with India. They have different approach to it, and this is related to trade, of course. The business is working back and forth in both sense. So, but if we look at how India is focusing on new technologies, on sciences, we can be sure that we will be hearing about India much more than we are hearing now.
All right, thank you very much. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to try and wrap it up with one final question. I'm going to take the last question on Slido that says, how will the EU's maturation as a sovereign, autonomous strategic entity affect its future global relations? I'm going to try and tweak that question a little bit and ask, because I think it is very important to give an answer to that, on whether you honestly think that the EU has learned from the experience of the past few years, and we have reached a point where there is enough internalization of the mistakes, of the discrepancies, of the inefficiencies, of the insufficient level of cooperation that has impeded the Union to really have its collective gravitas on the global level, where you see now that there is enough political will, there is enough realization of how united we need to be to stand a chance to not be bystanders on the international stage, and to use the leverage where we have it, for example, when it comes to trade, or to at least look for leverage when it is there, but we haven't discovered it yet when it comes to the JCPOA, when it comes to climate action, and to do this in a strategic way rather than being reactive, to be proactive, and to do what the EU global strategy says, to have the ambition behind the actions that the EU is going to be doing in the next few years. So Mr. Bertel and then Ms. Lintham.
Well, I would hope to I would like to say that the EU has lessons learned, but I can really answer that once we see the new Commission is established and how the new Commission is cooperating with the new European Parliament.
All right, that's a very clever way of inviting yourself to the next Pride European Summit, and maybe we can have this discussion next year. Ms. Lintham?
Well, I can very well agree, of course. Well, indeed, that is a question for the EU to look at, and even if also there are internal issues to deal with already, well, the setting up of the whole next composition of the leadership, the strategic agenda, the MFF. Well, still at the same time, it's very important to also make best use of the EU's global leverage on different issues to keep the multilateral order in good shape.
All right, thank you very much. So a lot is at stake outside, beyond European borders. The next few months will be very critical within European borders, and of course, waiting for Washington to discover reason or for Beijing to show its full deck of cards is not the way forward, as we established. Europe must chart an independent course, and hopefully by the Prague European Summit 2020 we will have signals that the course that has been attempted to be charted is a progressive one, is one that is pro-European. But in any case, stay tuned until next year to see what substantiates this course. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bertel. Thank you, Ms. Lintham. Thank you to all. Sorry for having to wrap up so shortly, but I was given direct instructions to do so. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. Thank you.